Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're just getting our tech set up. Just bear with us for a few moments, but we will start with an acknowledgement. So if I can ask you all to just come to a comfortable sitting position, gently close down your eyes and just prepare yourself to join the space. I'm also going to ask you to mute. There will be some interactive time where Fee will invite you to do questions and answers, but for now, I'll ask you to mute. Fee, do you want to just check your sound?
Yeah, can you hear me in that?
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's not the best, but it's not too bad. It's manageable.
Keep trying for my laptop as well.
Okay. All right. So just gently closing down your eyes, everyone. Taking a couple of deep breaths. Feeling yourself arrive in the space for studying, for being receptive to new information, new perspectives. Taking a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're sitting. For me, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Acknowledging the teachers that come before us in the traditions of yoga and Ayurveda. And acknowledging the wisdom keepers from our own personal culture and ancestry. Bringing the palms of your hands together in front of your heart. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. May the thoughts, the words, and the actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. Namaste. So welcome, Fee. I'm so happy to have you here with us. Let's just check your sound.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. That's so much better. Much louder. Awesome. Felicia and I have been long-term friends, collaborators, Ayurvedic goddesses together, yogis. She is a very dedicated and diligent student of yoga and Ayurveda for many years. And when I think of Fee, what I immediately, I almost have, if I had an image in mind of Fee, it would be someone with their hands in the dirt. She is someone who lives very close to the land, close to nature. She's a child of the bush. And I really feel that she brings that quality to the work of Ayurveda in a very different way to me. So one of the reasons that I'm really happy to share her teachings with you is that, we both have a very similar sort of perspective on Ayurveda and on, the trainings that we do, but we come at it from a slightly different way. And yeah, Fee's whole body of work is all around earth connection and nature connection. From my perspective, she might have a slightly different way of thinking about that, but that's certainly how I see her. So yeah, I'm really happy to leave you in her capable hands today. I'm so thankful to her for giving her time and her expertise for our group. And I know that many of you, some of you are here live, but I know many of you will be listening to the recordings. Underneath the recording for this video in the portal is the link for Fee's website. So if you want to order products from her or get in touch with her, stay connected with her, that's there for you guys to make that connection. Thank you, Fee. I'm going to hand over and leave it to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie. Okay, so basically, hello. I wanted to talk today a bit. I spoke to Katie about what to kind of cover, and we're going to talk a little bit about the nervous system in terms of the Ayurvedic perspective of that. And also herbs when it comes to Ayurveda and practices, etc. So yeah, I think we'll just dive in. I'll have a Q&A at the end as well if you want to ask any questions or if there's anything specific that you'd like to know about. So basically, the nervous system is really big at the moment. I'm a psychotherapist as well as an Ayurvedic practitioner. So there's a lot of conversations happening around the nervous system, and it's really good because it's such an important part of health, mind, body, and basically emotions as well. There is unfortunately misinformation out there, which always happens with wellness as well. But I kind of want to break that down into the way that Ayurveda saw it and also what we can do. So when it comes to the nervous system, it was definitely recognized in the Ayurvedic texts 6,000 years ago. They wrote about it. It is part of the dhatu. So it's part of one of the dhatus, which just terms of nervous system is one that they recognize is the spine, the brain, the skull, and all of responsible for the temperatures, our senses, our thoughts, our movements. Basically, it's the command center of our body. Every single thing that we do in our physical body and emotional and mental as well comes from the nervous system. It's kind of central to everything. It's kind of our computer, basically. The other dhatus are basically plasma, blood, the male and female hormonal systems, and then you've got bone and you've got muscle as well. So really important when it comes to building up in terms of the physical body. So when we talk about the nervous system, you probably worked with Katie a lot about the elements. So the nervous system is quite Vata. It's very much wind. And this is why it's kind of wind and Vata is seen as kind of kin when it comes to the elements, because when your Vata is out or when your nervous system is out, everything is kind of out as well. So there is a couple of ways to explain it. The best way I want to kind of talk about it, when we talk about regulation of the nervous system a lot in modern wellness and health, the thing that can be the most misleading is that we can just regulate our nervous system. It doesn't always happen like this. And I want to give an example of how the nervous system works and why we need it to work as well. So say, for instance, you're driving in your car and maybe you've just had a lovely lunch with a good friend and you're listening to a song that you love and you're quite relaxed. It's your day off. So your nervous system in that state is quite good. It's quite comfortable. You're thinking about the meal, you're thinking about your friend, you're thinking about relaxing, for example. And as you're driving, a car pulls out suddenly straight in front of you. So your nervous system is responsible for the reaction. Straight away, your body is going to heighten its senses, one thing that our nervous system will do. So all of a sudden, your peripheral view will be a lot better. You'll be able to see if there's other cars or people around you. Your reactions in terms of touch are going to happen a lot quicker. So you're going to be slamming on that brake, perhaps slamming on the beeper, for example. You're also going to, your breath is going to go quite quicker and everything. So it's a protective measure for us to kind of pull ourselves together and get out of it. Your eyesight, your everything will kind of heighten in that moment as well. And your reaction will be much quicker. You'll be able to slam on the brake, get yourself out quite quickly. And this is why we need the nervous system. This is why we need fight and flight, because not so much dangers are happening to us all the time in our life, but things do happen that we need to be able to react very quickly to. So this is an example of the nervous system kind of going from parasympathetic straight into sympathetic, straight into react. So what we would call in modern wellness is flight and flight, for example, but it has its purpose. I like to see the nervous system as kind of your overprotective friend or overprotective parent or sister. Sometimes they can be very good and protect us, and sometimes they can be overprotective and kind of do what they think is the best for us, but often it can lead to more harm. So if we use that example of the car pulling out straight away and you reacting, your nervous system doing it quite well. So this is an example after regulation, and why it becomes a little bit more complicated than it's kind of advertised. Once you've stopped that, once the car has stopped, once the accident hasn't happened, for example, what happens next will depend on a few factors. So it will depend on your health, your lifestyle, your learned experiences, any trauma, any emotional and physical upset as well. So this is where the regulation of nervous system becomes a little bit more complicated than it's kind of sold. So say, for example, you've been in a car accident before. This is a learned experience. The nervous system as a central system is our brain. One of the things that it does is our memories. And the reason that it holds on to the memories is because of that protective state. So it tries to remember things that have happened before, so it knows how to react again. So say, for example, you have been in a car accident before. This kind of moment of having to stop and force yourself to not be in a car accident again will come back into the nervous system as that memory. So you could maybe really panic, or maybe start to hyperventilate, or maybe have bad memories. You might not want to be in the car again. Once you get out, you check that everything's okay, you might not want to go back in the car, for example. So this is like an example of a learned experience or a trauma that you've experienced before, and how it could show up. There may be something going on in your life, or lifestyle factors or diseases, for example, that would cause you to absolutely react in a different way, where you become aggressive. So say, for instance, you'd get out of the car didn't have the car accident, you might want to react with that person, you might want to engage with that person, you might want to yell. That might be your first reaction as well. So that again would be a nervous system dysregulation. Even though the nervous system functioned to stop the accident, what's happening afterwards is anger, unresolved, or something that your nervous system remembers. And then the other possibility could be that you might freeze. You might absolutely freeze. So once the car has stopped, you might not be able to get out of the car. You may not be able to function. You may not be able to drive off for a while, for example. So these are other kind of ways, because maybe that's happened, or maybe you have had a confrontation in the past and it didn't go well. So your instinct, your nervous system instinct, excuse me, is to protect yourself and not put yourself in that situation again, for example. There are other ways that we can happen in fawn response, and I'll talk a little bit about fawn response, because it's really interesting when we look at other species and animals, and Ayurveda went into this as well, is that fawn response is kind of much more complicated. It's much more needed actually in human society. It's kind of basically the response to get on with it, which we have to, especially as parents, especially as business owners, especially as workers, especially in modern society. Sometimes we kind of have to ignore some certain things that are happening to get on with it, to make money, to pay the bills, to get the kids to school, for example. So what would happen if someone is quite often in fawn response in their life is that maybe that reaction would be to put on the brake to get themselves out of the accident, to hop out of the car, make sure everyone's okay, make sure there's no damage, for example, hop back in the car kind of on autopilot, go from A to B to where they are. And maybe that night, or even a few days later, something else might trigger them and they might really react. So they might have a panic attack, or a depressive episode, or anxiety, or emotional outburst at something else from this event, because they never really kind of processed it if they're stuck in fawn response. So does that kind of, I hope that kind of explains it. Feel free just to kind of like jot down questions and stuff for later. So this is where the nervous system needs to work. We need to be able to come into flat and react, for example. But what happens afterwards in those things is the dysregulation. And so you can see in this situation, it's not necessarily about regulating your nervous system, because we also need to be able to jump into sympathetic nervous system when things are unjust, or when things are scary, or when things are emergency, or things are action, for example. We need to have that response. We can't live just in this peaceful, relaxed way all the time. Otherwise, we wouldn't have our natural responses, and we could get ourselves into danger, for example, or ignore things that have happened. So when it comes to the nervous system, basically what we're talking about when we say regulate the nervous system is we go back to the stages of disease with Ayurveda. You may or may not be aware of these. So I kind of see Ayurveda, the way that I explain it is that there's two kind of branches to it. Ayurveda is the oldest medical system ever recorded on paper. So it is a medical system. It is a medicine. It is a science, absolutely. And a lot of branches of modern medicine have come from Ayurveda. Surgery being one of them has come from Ayurveda. So there is that whole grasp of it being a medicine and a respect for that as well. The other thing about Ayurveda, which you probably do a lot with Katie and what her focus in so beautifully, is the lifestyle. So having the lifestyle practices, the lifestyle diets and practices and awareness and connection and breath and all of these beautiful things. So the way that these two kind of weave together is when we talk about the 6 stages of disease. So there's 6 stages of disease that we would recognize in Ayurveda. And basically, the first and second stage is kind of just having this idea of prevention. This is what we want to do in Ayurveda. This is why Ayurveda is so valuable, because most modern medicine will hit people when they're in stage 5 or 6, and it will be about trying to treat. But the only kind of cure that we can ever really come into any disease is prevention of these type of things. So stage 1 and 2 is prevention. Stage 2 and stage 3 to 4 would be management. So say somebody is showing a few more signs of disease coming into their body, and it can be mental as well as emotional as well as physical, usually all 3. And that's the other beauty of Ayurveda. We recognize they are connected. So that would be more about management. And so then stage 5 and 6 would be about the treatments, the elimination, the getting really into the stages of disease. It's, as you can imagine, much harder to come from stage 6 down to stage 1 as it is to stay in stage 1, 2, 3. It's much easier to stay in these stages. And these are why the lifestyle practices of yoga are so important, and Ayurveda, because we keep ourselves in there. We want to prevent ourselves going into those later stages. But it can definitely help as well. So the way that I came into Ayurveda, I've been doing yoga for 30 years. And the way that I came into Ayurveda was I was actually in stage 6. And when I went to Western medicine, what I was diagnosed with, that was it. It was progressive. It was going to get worse during time. There was kind of no cure. There was no treatment, for example. And the treatments I was offered weren't really scientifically proven, and also quite dangerous as well. So I was recommended very lovely from an acupuncturist, because if you know much about the lineage of Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, Ayurveda kind of taught Chinese medicine, and then Chinese medicine kind of took it into their own beautiful sphere. And that's why the two work really well together, but also work quite differently as well. And so I was recommended to go to an Ayurvedic doctor, because what I had been diagnosed with in Ayurveda was curable in the first 2 years. And this was kind of mind-blowing to me. I was in my mid-20s. And so I went and worked with an Ayurvedic doctor, and they said, yeah, absolutely, you're in stage 6. But if we do everything that we can get you back to stage 3 or 4. And that's what happened. That's how I got into Ayurvedic medicine. I ended up doing an apprenticeship with that doctor for 2 years, so that I could do an exchange of getting all the treatments done and all the medicine and everything that Ayurveda did in exchange of working. So I was there. So it's completely possible to be in stage 5 and stage 6. There are obviously different diseases that you will stay in 5 and 6, but they're still manageable coming back to 1s and 2s. So when you kind of break up Ayurveda into those two ideas, one is a medicine, it's kind of the later stages of disease, and one is the lifestyle, which we want to focus on, and Katie does so beautifully, keeping ourselves in that preventable management state. So when it comes to the nervous system, and we're talking about this kind of stuff, when we talk about regulation of the nervous system, all of these practices have their place. They have their matter. They mean so much. They're so important. So things like self-massage, which I know Katie has gone through for you, awareness of the breath, awareness of what we're eating. My biggest thing is stress management. So no matter how many lifestyle practices we have, or what food we eat, or what herbs we take, or how much self-massage we do, if we're not managing our stress, we'll always stay in that more later stages of disease, no matter how that shows up in our own body. And so when it comes to the nervous system regulation, the other example I want to give you is someone who's having a panic attack. So this is a really good example of how the nervous system works, and how we're not really trying to regulate the nervous system. We're trying to manage it and prevent it. So if somebody is having a full-on panic attack, and maybe you've had them before, or you've witnessed someone you love have them, in that state, this is exactly what happens to the nervous system: extreme fight and flight. So for instance, the breath will be hyperventilating, they're having trouble breathing. They'll either be really cold or really hot. So our nervous system controls our temperature. And this is a really important factor when it comes to women's hormones and why we differ so much. There's other things that will happen. They may not be able to hear much. They may not be able to see much, or they may be able to hear and see a lot. So all of a sudden they may get migraines, and sounds and noises and lights might be like absolutely overwhelming, for example. So as touch, if you've ever dealt with someone with a panic attack, even touching them, they might kind of shake, or you may be able to like really squeeze them and they wouldn't even be noticing, for example. So getting someone out of a panic attack requires obviously quite a lot of prevention, medicine, and type of interaction as well. Coming back to the senses, if they're cold, getting them hot; if they're hot, cooling them down. All of these type of things coming into the nervous system. And of course, the breath, the most important. So we really recognize in Ayurveda, with the Datsu of the nervous system, prana is so important, because it's the first thing that will speed up if we're in flight and flight. So being able to cool that down. And this is also a reason we do Lamaze classes, for example. So that kind of breath when someone is in a panic attack is really important, that calming them down, and then starting to get them to hold their inhale, or even better, to have 2 inhales. So we kind of go like this kind of thing. Once somebody comes out of a panic attack, we've got them out of that panic state, they're not regulated. Their nervous system isn't regulated. And this is where it kind of becomes misunderstanding in the modern wellness about regulating your nervous system. All of the practices to get someone out of a panic attack, once they're out of a panic attack, they aren't in a regulated nervous system, because it got them there to that state to start with. So what it's more about is giving them the keys and the practices to support their nervous system to regulate themselves. This is quite an extreme example, something like a panic attack. And this is kind of also coming back to those stages of disease with Ayurveda. There's always a root cause. There's always a root cause of something. And quite often when it comes to nervous system dysregulation, the root cause is mental and emotional, and it requires a lot more than just these little practices. It requires counseling, it requires therapy, it requires a lot of inner work into going to what the root causes are. It can absolutely be fixed. It can absolutely be aware, absolutely be validated. And sometimes we don't often know where it comes from. So this is why we kind of got to work with certain measures of professionals when it comes to brain and mental health, if we continually have a dysregulated nervous system. No matter how many practices we do beforehand, if we're in stage 3 or 4 or even more with our mental health, then that's not going to kind of help and support us. We need to really support and dive into that. So this is where it comes into prevention. So in terms of prevention and being able to understand yourself, number 1 is really being able to connect. So connect with who you are, where you are, all of these type of things, what your normal reaction is, and give yourself situations, give yourself situations of like, if I was in a car accident, how would I react? Would my reaction be to get really angry? Would my reaction be to say I'm fine and just want to run away and hide, and maybe emotionally it hits me later? Would my reaction be to freak out and not want to get into a car again, for example? The moments that we can feel and connect that our nervous system is out of regulation, it's going to give us an insight into what the root cause is. And sometimes, mainly, it can just be a learned experience. So this is where this idea of triggers and glimmers comes from. And we also recognize that in Ayurveda as well. So something like PDS, for example, when you think about one of the main functions of the nervous system is senses, then obviously a lot of people's triggers would be senses based. So if someone has been in say they grew up in an alcoholic family, for example, the smell of alcohol or the sight of alcohol can be a trigger for them. And that is basically the senses. And it's what is happening there is your nervous system is going, hey, let's heighten this sense, because before in our memory, we weren't safe in this situation. I can see someone who's drunk, or I can smell alcohol. This makes me scared. It makes me in fight and flight. It dysregulates my nervous system. But what's actually happening is, beautifully, if we look at it, our nervous system is trying to protect us. What happens with the nervous system mainly is it is that overprotective person in our life. It just wants to protect us. Unfortunately, for a lot of us, I think every single person these days, we all have learned experiences that might not actually serve us, and they become a part of our story. And whether we consciously or unconsciously attach to them, we recognize in Ayurveda and psychotherapy that these can sometimes show up in our nervous system and long-term become dysregulated, because what we're doing is we're kind of attaching ourselves to a memory of how we knew we could handle it before. Because even though we may have been through traumas or learn experiences or all of these type of things in our life, we are here. We still are here. We're still breathing. We're still living. So our nervous system has supported us in some way, but it likes to show up in supporting us the same way. So another really good example of this that I like to show people, because we tend to think when the nervous system is out of, unable to regulate itself, it's always a bad thing. It's a really stressful thing, or we think of flight and flight, for example. One really good example of this is somebody who has maybe been in abusive relationships before, or cheated on before, or lied to, had very bad string of relationships, or parents, for example. When that person is in a relationship that is very healthy and affectionate and loving and safe, their nervous system will also be out of regulation. They will actually struggle in that, because this is the example of memory. So while they're all of a sudden in a safe and loving and honest relationship, their brain, their nervous system has never known that before. So they may react by being suspicious, being panicking, questioning if everything's okay. Things like anxiety will definitely come up, because they will think this isn't going to last, this isn't real, I'm not seeing everything. They'll start to gaslight themselves, they'll start to question things. So even though their external environment is quite safe for once, if they've never experienced that before, they're still going to experience the same senses of flight and flight. So this is another example about how our nervous system works with memory. So when it comes to Ayurveda, when we look at people who have a consistent nervous system dysregulation that is causing different stages of disease, usually at the start stage 2, that would just be someone who is having trouble sleeping, someone who is having trouble with their stress. If you remember, or parasympathetic nervous system, we often call it rest, digest, and heal. So one massive thing in Ayurveda, quite beautifully, is digestion. So if people are having trouble with digestion all of a sudden and there's nothing else going on, it can often be just this idea of their nervous system not being able to regulate. Libido is also a really big one. It's a really important one for men and women, and not just libido, but being able to experience an orgasm is actually also linked to the nervous system. We need to be able to be in a state where we are relaxed, to be able to be comfortable and safe and warm and open. But then we also need to be able to jump up into that more kind of heightened nervous system in terms of experiences. And what will happen if our nervous system is constantly dysregulated is we'll have trouble kind of getting to that point and coming back and relaxing, or maybe we won't let ourselves as well, which again is another huge root cause when it comes to counseling and psychotherapy that I see all the time. Is often some people's root cause of nervous system dysregulation is letting themselves be happy or letting themselves enjoy pleasure because they don't think that they're worth it, or that they shouldn't be able to. Maybe they have to keep themselves too busy, for example. So when we come back into the Ayurveda practices, all of these kind of awarenesses is really important. This is where the connection of Ayurveda is so important and so different to Western medicine, because if someone was to present to a doctor and say, you know, I'm having trouble with my digestion and my sleep, and I'm having trouble with my libido, or I'm having trouble with kind of coming back after a stressful situation, you'd probably be prescribed as anxiety or done blood works, for example, maybe being told that you have a hormonal imbalance. These can all be root causes, hormonal balance being a massive root cause of a lot of people as well. But if we're not kind of addressing where this behavior is coming from, as we do in Ayurveda and psychotherapy, then we're never kind of going to get to that root cause. So when it comes to really tuning into yourself and figuring out what kind of pulls you out of your nervous system state. So if you're having trouble sleeping, for example, it's probably, I think, the most important thing ever. So if sleep is a really hard thing for you to do, then it's coming into why is this, even if you do all the practices, then this can be a stage 1 and stage 2 of disease. Maybe every single thing else in your life on paper or in practice is working, but you're not sleeping very well. This is a very clear symptom and sign of something happening with your nervous system. We need to sleep. We need to be able to rest, digest, and heal. And when our nervous system and our brain is not letting us sleep, there's something else going on that we need to start to prevent and manage straight away. For example, obviously lifestyle factors and environment factors happen. So this is why something like postnatal care is so huge and important in Ayurveda, because having a newborn baby or having, you know, post-surgery, for example, is very hard and interrupts your sleep. And so we recognize that these kind of people are very vulnerable to come into different stages of disease, and to be able to really manage and nourish them as much as possible. When you're thinking about mental health, it's really good to be able to come into the idea of the nervous system, because again, a lot of the messages out there about anxiety and depression can kind of be misleading. And if you're someone who loves your yoga as much as me and loves the yoga philosophy, it's all there in the yoga philosophy. When we attach and we grasp to something, then it's going to kind of pull us back and down. And unfortunately, what's happening is I see a lot of patients saying, I'm just really depressed, or I've just got a lot of anxiety, or I'm just got a lot of vata, or I'm just super angry because my pitta is out of balance. This is all good to be able to be aware and recognize and use these kind of terms, and they need to be validated. But at the same time, why is this consistently happening? Is it actually your personality, or is there something else going on that we can manage and prevent, for example? So anxiety, the way that it presents itself is the nervous system in fight and flight. And if we look at the Ayurvedic ways of anxiety, it's a physical thing that's coming up. And so it is definitely recognized as the whole nervous system starting to be stressful in fight and flight. So instead of, if you're dealing with yourself that has anxiety, or you're dealing with someone that you love that has anxiety, one of the worst things we can say to ourselves or someone that we love is, it's okay, just calm down, everything will be all right. Just, try and ground, calm. And this is another reason why some of the practices can be damaging or not as supportive as we need, because if our goal is to ground and calm when we're in a state of anxiety and flight, there's a big difference if you think of that panic attack of being in that state and being calm. There has to be a huge part in the middle. So something like anxiety or something like stressful flight, to kind of just try and calm. One of my teachers always says, like, you can't meditate when you can't pay the bills. You can't meditate when you're incredibly stressed. And I've seen a lot of people doing practices like transcendental meditation, for example, to try and deal with anxiety. There's nothing in the yogic or the Ayurvedic text that would tell someone in that state to go straight into something so deep as a meditative practice like transcendental meditation. It's too much in the brain. What we need to do, and if you have a look at the limbs of yoga, they'll always teach you, is number one is always kindness. So being kind to ourselves or the people that we're in this anxiety state. And in between that is the body, the asana practice. It doesn't have to be yoga. LISS, I don't know if you've ever heard of LISS. So it's low intensity, steady state. This type of form of movement is the most important when it comes to being able to regulate and support your nervous system through Ayurveda, through yoga, through modern psychotherapy. So it's things like walking, it's things like swimming, it's things like hatha yoga, things like restorative yoga, yin yoga, things like Pilates. This is why this is kind of starting to see a movement now, because people are realizing that if their core root problems are hormonal or emotional or mental, something like a high intensity workout is only going to add more stress into the body. So when we do these more low intensity, steady state type of movements, dancing, shaking, kriyas, if you know the kriyas, these kind of like big movements to come back into the breath, that's kind of pulling our body back into where we are, coming through the lymphatic system, for example. This kind of movement is much more better long-term, whether you're in stages 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 or 6, to be able to help you support your nervous system and any stage of diseases that are coming up and balances in Ayurveda. So if you were dealing with someone with anxiety, the worst thing, or yourself, is to try and force them to do something like meditation, for example, or to calm down or be grounded. You actually need to get it out. It's wind. If you think about a tornado, you wouldn't just say to a tornado, hey, just stop being a tornado. You would try to diffuse it. Do you know what I mean? It would need to kind of separate and diffuse. So dancing, shaking, this is why we kind of do this shamanic more type of things that in Ayurveda, if you go back, a lot of the yoga practices today won't really recognize 6,000 years ago. It was more about the breath. It was more about the big movements, the kriyas, for example, coming out of the body to be able to go into the mind and use that before we even head into something like meditation or that. When it comes to depression, it's a similar thing in terms of it being a freeze response. So if you've had to have some time in your life where you've experienced a freeze response, for many people, if they experience child trauma, for example, their response would be freeze, because as a child, you can't fight or you can't run away. You're just kind of frozen in that situation. So you kind of just freeze and take it in, for example. And these type of things can lead over time to what we would know as different imbalances with earth being too heavy, and also showing up in the mind and the body as being too heavy, too frozen to move, basically. So again, when someone has that state in their nervous system that's kind of showing up as sadness or depression, Grief is a different thing. Grief is something that is really beautiful and validated and should never be rushed or pushed. It has to be honored. It has to be recognized. And that may be a root cause of why someone's nervous system is also out. Grief is very beautifully recognized in Ayurveda as well as space. And so when it comes to this depressive kind of sadness, what you want to be able to do, instead of telling yourself or someone that you love when they're in that state, that frozen state, just do something, just get up and move, just start something. That's kind of impossible. You're basically telling the nervous system, who is your overprotector and that's protecting you by freezing, to come out of that state. And all it knows is how to freeze. All it knows is how to protect. So one of the translations of depression in Ayurveda translates to deep rest. It's the same kind of word. So it's honoring that when we get to that state mentally, emotionally, and physically, what our body is doing is shutting down. And it's shutting down not just as a protective measure, it's shutting down because it's too much. So I've suffered from chronic depression on and off my entire life. And it wasn't until I learned this about Ayurveda and psychotherapy that I could start to manage it instead of having it kind of take me out for years. It would show up often hormonally, because I'm premenopausal now, and it would come into my life and I would just be like, right, deep rest, literally close the curtains without any guilt, make my to-do list as small as possible, cancel, say no to people, let people that you love know I'm just going in for a couple of days, sleep, cry, eat, sleep, cry, like just get it out. The best state to be in when you're in that frozen state or depressive state is bored. When you become bored in that state, then you know your nervous system is starting to go, hey, okay, let's do something. You know what I mean? So if you're dealing with someone that you love that is in quite a long depressive state, or yourself, instead of pushing and pushing and pushing, do the opposite. Just binge a whole TV show, binge a whole movie, sit with them, be with them, get them warm, get them comfortable. One of the best things about Ayurveda is we recognize so deeply that the nervous system is connected to memory, but also through memory is food. And maybe you've worked with this with Katie, but so making favorite meals, for example, my favorite meal, even though I've been a vegan and vegetarian on and off my whole life, but I'm not now, even in those moments, was spaghetti bolognese, because that was my mom's favorite thing to cook. So even the smell and the taste of that would bring me up a little bit out of that state when I was in my really chronic depressive states. So if you are dealing with someone that you love like that, make them their favorite meals, have their favorite foods. If you are someone like that, that gives you a really good idea of what to ask of other people. When someone says to you, "Are you okay?" just write to them, "No, can you make me lasagna?" Like, I mean, this is how we can also ask for help. And it's so beautifully recognized in Ayurveda that we have this memory with our food, and that comes from the senses. And if you come back to the nervous system, one of the main functions of the nervous system is the senses. So things like making a nice relaxing bath that's warm, that smells good, all of these type of things really have senses. This is another reason why weighted blankets have become so popular. They come from Ayurveda. They're absolutely in the Ayurvedic text. The more you can weigh yourself, the more you're going to kind of weigh down that extra tornado constantly happening in your mind and your emotions, for example. After pregnancy, we would be weighting down the woman's belly and the woman's womb, for example. My dog is a really good example. If you can see her sound asleep here. So she's a rescue 10-year-old, and she was abused a lot before I got her. And she's been kind of a good example of how to regulate your nervous system. Often she will have little shakes and tremors, remembering things, or if she hears certain sounds. So putting weighted blankets on her, for example, making sure that she's weighted without feeling like I'm in her space. So those kind of things are really important too. So in Ayurveda and psychotherapy, we really recognize temperature is so important when it comes to the nervous system, and to also state managing and prevention of your nervous system. And this is another point that I really want to focus on today, because I know that Katie does such a wonderful work with women of all ages. A lot of the practices in modern wellness and health are unfortunately being tested or tried or promoted or marketed by young men or fit, healthy men. So if we look at those stages of disease, they're often 1 or 2 in stages of man. If we look at yoga, if you're familiar with yoga, it would kind of be like the variation of Ashtanga to Iyengar, by 2 very different men. Ashtanga being a young, fit male, and Iyengar being someone with what would be explained in Ayurveda would almost be polio or multiple sclerosis or something. He had quite a lot of injuries. And so when we look at these 2 different yogas, you know, if you were someone who was at a different stage in your life, you wouldn't start Ashtanga yoga. It's very masculine, it's very young. And I'm sure Katie's talked to you a lot about women's hormones, but you know, men's hormones, they go like this. Women's hormones go like this. And that's just the state, whether you're bleeding or not bleeding, or whether you're pregnant or, you know, you've just had a baby, our natural hormones are meant to go like this. And so a lot of the time when we're looking at some of the more modern practices, a really good example of this, and I'm sorry if you love this because it does work for some people, is ice baths. So a lot of the practices in Ayurveda, when you go through the texts, is about temperature regulation and temperature warmth. A lot of them is about warmth. I'm sure you've learnt with Katie, a lot of it is about eating warmer foods or room temperature foods. People who are in stage 1 or 2 absolutely can do all these type of practices, and that's why it works okay. If you have different constitutions, it might work for you. If you have a different lineage, say for example, if someone grew up in a very cold country or a very hot country, then obviously they can work with temperature much different. But when it comes to our temperature of our belly, it's like 37 degrees. And if you're already in a stress state in your life, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, externally, internally, there's so much stress going on at the moment in life. I would actually, as a counselor, be more worried about someone who wasn't experiencing any stress, because to me that would be kind of this ignorance that we talk about in yoga. And so when it comes to being in a stress state, if you're having something like ice cold water and things like that, as Katie would have told you, you know, you're just putting more stress into your digestive system. And if you're already experiencing exhaustion and burnout, then you're just creating more. I always like to describe the Agni and the digestive system as like a rat in a wheel. And so we kind of just want that rat to be able to kind of keep moving and keep moving. And every now and again, it will need to stop and sleep when we sleep. But if you're doing something like putting in really hot or really strange foods or hard to eat foods, for example, that rat has to go a lot faster. And our body spends so much of its energy digesting food. So when this rat is going fast and it kind of burns out, we're going to burn out as well. We're going to start to come into those more later stages of disease through our digestion. But when it comes to the super cold practices that are happening, what I'm also seeing is that people are doing them for nervous system regulation, as that's how they've been marketed and managed. But we have to keep in mind from the Ayurvedic perspective, the people that it's working for, that people that are marketing it, the people that started it, were in stage 1 or 2, mainly with male bodies. And the only reason that matters is because a male's hormone naturally will go like this and a female's will go like this. So absolutely, when a female's body is maybe here, then jumping in an ice plunge bath might be amazing. But the minute that woman's body goes down the next week, because that's how it happens every week, and more sometimes, is it's going to be quite damaging. It's going to be quite stressful. One thing I've seen as an example of this in a few cases is women coming in who are extremely constipated or that have trouble bleeding, and who are having stomach issues. Some of them have got pelvic inflammation, all of these type of things. If you know about Apanavatu in yoga and Ayurveda, Apanavatu is our downward wind, and it's extremely important. It's one of the most important things to know about your own body. So we have this natural wind that goes down. This is basically the gravity of our body that allows us to go to the toilet. It makes us eat something from here and it goes out here. It allows us to have babies. It allows us to bleed as women, these type of things. It has to go down. And when that part of Vatu is up and mixed up, for example, it can cause a lot of problems in digestion. It can cause a lot of problems later in life in the mental health, in the heart, in blood, all of these type of things. So a few women I've seen over the last 6 months are coming in with really bad Apanavatu. They're unable to bleed, or they're spotting, they're unable to have a proper digestive system, and they're eating all the right foods and taking all the right herbs and pretty relaxed, good lifestyle, for example. And then we get down to it and they're doing these ice baths at least once a week. And what's happening literally is it's squeezing. So their pelvic floor is literally squeezing and they're having troubles in this whole area. Some of them have pelvic inflammation, all of this type of thing. So when we look at these practices, they are definitely in Ayurveda temperature control, but we've got to kind of look at it a little bit realistically and be like, that is for someone like this. Similar to kind of the Wim Hof method. And Wim Hof method is really good for somebody, again, who is stage 1 or 2 and maybe doesn't have that hormonal natural, I don't want to say natural imbalance, but hormonal natural changes that women would have. If you look at something like the Wim Hof movement and the breath, it's really strong. We go back to panic attack, it's the same breath. Anything like this, that we're kind of getting ourselves into a state of nervous system dysregulation or telling our body to panic, can cause problems. And the reason that there's a disassociation with it is because it's so marketed these days as these practices are really good. When you come down to the actual roots of Ayurveda, pranayama, temperature control, very, very important, absolutely. But as nice and soft as you can for yourself. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be extreme. I always think of it as the way of, if your body is under stress, stress being the most important thing to think about when it comes to your health, if you put it into a state of any other stress, then it's going to add to the more stress. The root cause is often stress. The root cause is often trauma or learned experience or a hormonal imbalance. And when we can't when we just kind of put the practices on top of that without getting to the root causes, then it can lead to more problems with the nervous system later down the track. So yeah, so those kind of things, they definitely do work for some people. I'm much more about being hot. So I've been telling everyone, if you're in Australia at the moment, it's going to be an extremely hot summer this year. We're going to have a lot of bushfires. We're going to have a lot of drought. So one way to deal with that and prepare for your body, because Ayurveda is about prevention, is now in October to start exposing yourself softly to hot. So if you've got access to a sauna or a steam room, or even putting your head in the bowl, the old steam bowls that we used to do, or having extra hot baths, etc., it seems weird because it's what society is telling us is the opposite of to be cold. But if your body starts to get used to being hot now, it's going to help you through the months of summer, as well as obviously the practices to keep cool. And this is why temperature regulation is so important in Ayurveda, because it comes back from the nervous system. It's why we recognize menopause as such an important factor when we're looking at Ayurveda as managing and preventing, because one of the huge things that happens with menopause is temperature changes, and they can be quite sudden. And so when we be able to help our body regulate, it's going to help long term. One thing I'm seeing a lot of and talking about a lot of is people that are really experiencing bad menopause, a lot of symptoms, a lot of uncontrollable symptoms. One of the root causes of that will be that their nervous system is dysregulated because they're having troubles kind of bumping back. It will be natural sometimes for some people. Menopause is completely different for other people. as is pregnancy, to be able to kind of have hot flushes, and that kind of is your body and your hormones regulating. But if they're becoming very bad or very long, that is often a root cause that the nervous system isn't regulated, and sometimes mainly that is just due to stress or something more going on that would require therapy and more deeper investigation. So when we come into the kind of stages and the lifestyle factors of Ayurveda that we work with and Katie works with so well, these are the things that do count. These are the things that do matter, that do work. But obviously, if things continue to get bad, then there's more root causes we need to look at, but we still need to keep them up. And this is why Ayurveda is often seen as a preventative medicine, because the prevention is really way more important than kind of being able to cure or fix something. And so when we come into these kind of practices, this is why Ayurveda and yoga was always seen as a dual. They always work together. One was never separate from the other. Unfortunately, it is in modern world. Unfortunately, we're doing vinyasa practices in heated rooms in summer. And so these kind of excuse me, I'm just going to some water. Oh. So when we come into the Ayurvedic prevention, it is about this being able to have these different things. And the other thing about the nervous system, as I talked about, is it's our memory. So when we have these practices and when we have this devotion to ritual and to routine for ourselves and our health, and we prioritize that without guilt, but with kindness, then our body also remembers that. So say, for instance, you are someone who can get quite panic attack or quite anxiety or quite depression. Like I said, using myself as an example, I've had years before to chronic depression. If I have an episode now, it will probably be about 3 or 4 days. And that's because I kind of let myself rest, let myself cry, and then come back to the practices slowly. And it doesn't take long for memory. It's like muscle memory for my brain to go, oh yeah, we know this. We know this self-practice. We know this breath. We know this massage. We know that. And it can kind of come back into that very quickly. So one of the reasons we do these practices, very much like yoga, we say practice, 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 all is coming. One of my students the other day, as I said that in class, was like, what is coming? She was really concerned and scared. And this is this idea, we're just preparing, Ayurveda and yoga is mainly, ideally, if you're lucky enough to be pretty healthy, it's about prevention and it's about memory of having these practices. I really like to recognize that, ritual and devotion and routine, and that is basically discipline, but with love. It's like having discipline, but with love. When we come into the idea that we have to be disciplined and we have to do this, and we have to do that, that's not kind, it's not soft, it's not kind of having these changes that we do in our lives and our hormones. But if we come from a place of ritual, whether that means having a practice that is 3 minutes or having a practice that is an hour, whatever your day can handle, whatever you can handle, knowing that stress management is the most important thing. So when we have a look at the practices of Ayurveda, and I'm sure Katie's gone through them a lot, self-massage is massive. It's by far the most popular treatment that I do at my clinic is Abhyanga massage. And when we look at the way that we learn Abhyanga massage, it takes, it took 2 years to learn those proper techniques, because we're looking at things like Kapanavatu, we're looking at being able to get the downward wind, we're looking at mama points, we're looking at lymphatic system. It's not just a massage of muscles and of bones, it's a massage of being able to come into the whole nervous system, for example. And it sounds strange because I'm not someone who likes to sell or market myself much, but I will often have people come into my clinic, and because I offer counseling as well, and they are completely frazzled. Do you know what I mean? Something may have happened, or they're emotional, or they're very tight and wound up. And as soon as they sit down and I say to them, what's going on? Let's have a chat before we have a treatment. They might burst out in tears, or they might, you know, have an emotional reaction because someone is just there holding them. And this is why it's really important to work with someone who works with mental health and is trained as well, if you're coming to the point of coming into those further stages of disease. And so when that happens, they're quite, you know, frazzled. After the massage, after the Abhyanga, after the chat, it is like they're a completely different person. And it's such an honor to that. Like, they might even tell me that they haven't been able to sleep and they will fall asleep on the table, because this is the power of Abhyanga. It's the power of massage. It's the power of touch, if you think about senses. So if you're dealing with someone that you love that has a really dysregulated nervous system, stuck in fight and flight, something as simple as massaging their feet, massaging the head is so important in Ayurveda, because this is, you know, the brain. It's telling the brain, hey, we've got some nice touch happening. Like, maybe we don't need to be so much in the brain firing. Maybe we can focus on the touch that's happening outside of the skull. Doing it yourself is incredibly important as well. So one thing that I started doing with Rose when I got her about 2 months ago, is making sure every single night before we went to bed, I would give her a really good pamper, so that I could get familiar with if she was in any pain, but also getting her familiar with that touch. And it's been incredible to be able to witness a dog that was quite abused and neglected, asked to be brushed. You know, she'll come up to me and like sit there waiting to be brushed. And when I do it with her, she will fall asleep pretty much straight away, pop under the bed. And one thing I started even doing myself, which I'd stopped doing, is after I've done all that with her and she's in bed, I'm kind of lying in bed. I'm like, I'm going to start, you know, brushing my hair more, because we all kind of just brush our hair for maintenance. But I started doing, you know, brushing my hair a lot and stuff. And this connection to something like brushing your hair is that whole nervous system. That's how the nervous system wants to function, at that kind of slowness, at that kind of touch, at that kind of function. And so these kind of things, super simple, but really important and very effective, not just in Ayurveda, but when we work in psychotherapy. If you have someone or yourself who's dealing with a lot of anxiety and stress and flight, to have these tiny little practices like brushing your hair or giving a head massage or a foot massage that they can start to do at any time, because it works really well with children. My niece suffers from a lot of anxiety. And so one of the things that we start doing with her is the foot massage. I taught her a few of the mama points in her feet and also in her face as well. So she'll often tell me when she's having an episode coming on at school, she'll pop into the toilets and start to massage her face. And whenever I see her, I make a point of giving her the full massage, so she understands the connection between touch, between the massage, and then she can also self-apply that. So that's another thing that's really important, self-massage. If I'm working with couples as a therapist as well, it's one of the first things I'll tell people when they're having troubles as a couple, is just to start giving each other more contact. That's not sexual, that's not forced, that's not scheduled, just a little massage of the shoulders, you know, all of these type of things, holding of the hands. And so that's, you know, really important massage. When it comes to herbs is, I'm also a herbalist. It's also my other massive passion. So there's incredible herbs in Ayurveda that I'm sure you know of a lot, but we can kind of mix in the Western herbs as well. So you may have heard this word called adaptogens. There's adaptogen herbs. There's actually only 9 proven adaptogen herbs that have been really extensively proven and researched. And the reason that we want to research herbs is because plant medicine is so old and so beautiful and so connected to us. It's one of the best ways to work with healing on any level of disease, but it's also very sensitive and very, you know, it has to be respected as well. And so when it comes to adaptogens, the word adaptogen means that these herbs, these medicines actually have the ability to slow down and to be able to stop and make work present a different hormone in your brain. So when is happening physically when you come into stress, into flight and flight, say for instance, back to that car accident example, is that what happens is your body will go, oh, danger. So your eyes will see it, your body will see it, your brain in a millisecond will send a message to your glands to say, hey, we're in danger. Your glands will produce more cortisol and more stress hormones so that your senses will switch on and you'll be able to react much quicker, do whatever you need to do. And the problem with the dysregulating the nervous system is that it's often unable to come back because the hormonal balance is there. If there's a hormonal balance, or if the reaction that you needed to come into flight and flight brings up something emotional or trauma or a learned experience, then it's very hard for your mind. It becomes like a cognitive dysfunction as to know if you're still in danger or not, for example. A really good example of that is COVID. COVID happened to every single one of us, yet no one's really talking about it anymore, about how it kind of affected people personally and social, and what kind of came out of that as well. It kind of feels like we're all just shut it out and moved on. But what I'm seeing as a psychotherapist is that people are having unexplained fear or concerns about security, things like the cost of living, etc., because they don't really know how to deal with that, and it's starting to show up in their mental health and their physical health. And one of the big traces back of that is COVID, because you think about your nervous system before COVID. If anyone said to you what was going to happen, no one would have known it or believed it, because we'd never experienced it. No one's nervous system had experienced that. So while it was something that happened that our nervous system had to adapt and learn, our brain still remembers and is still constantly going, oh, is this going to happen again? Or is that, what's going to happen again? And so there's still that level of uncertainty in our brain. And that's just a protective measure, because something happened that our brain didn't know how to handle and had never had to handle before. We all got through it, but our brain is still trying to protect us. Maybe it's going to happen again. Maybe I need to be extra worried. So this is also what can happen in that long-living kind of cognitive dysfunction. And so when we come back into breath work, for example, incredibly important to be able to come back to the breath, to be able to calm ourselves down. And it's not kind of forcing ourselves as well. A lot of people will force themselves to nose breathe, for example. I'm seeing at the moment, they'll tape things over their mouth. And if they've got a past of having any trauma, if one of their root causes of nervous system dysregulation is feeling unsafe in their life, and they're taping over their mouth at night when their body is going into parasympathetic nervous system, it's not going to do anything. It's going to make things worse. Their body's going to feel like they can't breathe, and they're, going into a panic state. So if your root causes, if you're unsure about your root causes, get some professional help, because you can really pull them apart and navigate them, and it will change everything. That was a huge thing with my own healing, is figuring out what my root causes of why I was in stage 6 of disease. Once I figured that out, it was like puzzle piece was put together. But yeah, things like just kind of forcing yourself to nose breathe. If your body naturally breathes through the mouth, then let it breathe through the mouth. Focus more on the quality of your breath and being able to breathe into the whole capacity of your lungs, being able to, hold the breath. Pranayama, if you're not sure, means 4-part breath. So it's inhale, where like hold of the inhale, exhale, hold of the exhale. A lot of people struggle with holding on an exhale. And the reason being is that there will be something in your learned experiences in your life where not being able to breathe is scary. Maybe you've had panic attack, or you've drowned or something like that, because we're essentially holding when our lungs are empty. So So just start with the inhale and the hold. So even just things like that, I would work with people and say, you know, they'll say to me like, I need to be nose breathing. And if their breath is really through the mouth, it's more important for me that for them to be able to regulate some kind of rhythm with wherever their breath is, than to be able to kind of, you know, change their breath up. One of the Buddhist medicine ways of dealing with anxiety and nervous system regulation, of the practices that they use that I still use today for a lot of people, is the mind breath connection. So you're basically telling yourself as you inhale, I'm aware of my inhale, and as you exhale, I'm aware of my exhale. And you're just repeating that in your mind when you breathe. And what happens is that you need your voice, you need your memory, you need your breath. So a few of the senses are switched on, and saying those words will help you slow down the breath as well. And that can be really effective. I've dealt with someone who is trained in Buddhism who was having a panic attack right in front of me, and I knew they knew that, so we could come back to that in an instant. I am aware of my inhale, I'm aware of my exhale. And these are why these practices are really important to teach with kids, but also yourself. You'd be surprised at how much you can come back to a state of being able to function. Say, for instance, if you were in that car accident, you know, being able to take a few breaths. I'm aware of my inhale, I'm aware of my exhale, I'm safe, for example. Yeah, so breath, pranayama. The asana practice in yoga is so important, but so misleading in the West. It is not about handstands. It's not about back bends. It's not about chaturangas. It's not about any of that. I actually sometimes hate being a yoga teacher in the eastern suburbs because a lot of the students would expect that. And I've had a massive shift since I turned 40. I had a massive shift with where I was teaching and who I was teaching, because I didn't want students that wanted me to teach that. Yeah, I wanted students that wanted to learn these practices and the philosophy of yoga. Asana doesn't mean anything else but comfortable seat. That's what it means. It means the ability to be able to be comfortable in a state of discomfort. That's the goal of asana yoga, and not just mentally, physically in your breath. So sitting is asana. Being able to lie on your back with a cushion under your knees is asana. Whatever is going to help you come into a comfortable state is asana. Moving through breath is vinyasa. That's what vinyasa means. It simply means movement with breath. It doesn't mean you have to do anything like a split or a salutation. It just simply means, you know, whether you push that into a lower lunge and a back, or you come into a cat cow, or you come into something that feels, I encourage people to put music on if you're someone who loves music, or have silence if you're someone who loves silence, and come into your breath, and whatever movement works for that. It can literally be 4 movements. One of my favorite ways to do it is inhale on a cat, exhale on a cow, inhale legs up, exhale on a down dog, inhale knees come forward, exhale push back, and just repeat those 4 asana movements, but with breath. This is something I do consistently if I'm too distracted, if my mind is gone, or if I'm starting to fall in any type of state that I know isn't regulated. Just come back to being on the ground, moving with really soft, really gentle breath. That's what asana is. That's what yoga is for in Ayurveda. It's not for being flexible or being strong or being a show off. It's for being able to connect with your body and your breath and come back into that state. And for some people, yeah, they want to sweat, they want to move, but there would also be a root cause of why of that. And we could go into that, you know, as an one-on-one thing. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that, a lot of asana, a lot of pranayama. The herbs are amazing. So
adaptogens when we come back to it. Ashwagandha, of course, is one of the proven adaptogens, but ashwagandha, again, more commonly and research and more beneficial for male bodies, being male hormones, testosterone high bodies. And it can only be used for 3 months at a time if it's used singular. So again, you have to work with a herbalist that knows, because there's a lot of contradictions with ashwagandha if you're on any prescription medication. It's a little bit safer than St. John wort and valerian root, but it still has a lot of safety issues. And so you need to work with someone and not just take something off the shelf. I prefer personally Rhodea, and which is rosewood, and Shirodara when it comes to herbs for women. But even more simple than that, lemon balm, chamomile, lavender, oat straw, passion flower. These are my 5 favorite nervine herbs. And while they're not adaptogens, they won't actually help the body in terms of the hormone be able to adapt to stress. Nervines work as if you have a think about how a painkiller works. So when you're experiencing pain in your body, what's happening is your brain is communicating with your sore knee, and your knee is communicating with your sore brain, and it's saying, this is in pain, this is in pain. So when we take a painkiller, it's not fixing the root cause of the knee. What it's doing is slowing down that message. And in often cases, depending on how strong the painkiller is, it's blocking it. So the pain is still there. The problem is still there, but we're just blocking the message of being able to feel it. So nervines work on the same principle, but very, very, very much more gentle. So instead of saying, I'm stressed, taking nervine herbs isn't going to say, okay, we can't think that we're stressed, we can't feel that we're stressed. It's just going to calm down how the nervous system reacts. So another good way of thinking of it is fairy lights, which I have some on. So if your body is stressed, it's like your nervous system, your brain messages are like, flickering fairy lights, and you take a nervine and it might just have a nice soft glow. It's still there. The stress is still there. The root cause is still there, but you're just kind of calming it down a little bit. So as I said, there are some amazing herbs in Ayurveda, but a lot of them have very strong contradictions with prescription medication that you're on. This is why I prefer to use herbs with blends, and always from someone who is a herbalist, because some of the herbs work better together. Ashwagandha works really well with different herbs to make it a lot easier and softer. Another really good one like that is maca root. So ashwagandha and maca root work really well together, but I wouldn't be having ashwagandha by itself. But when we come into this idea of calming the nervous system with nervines, super, super safe. So I even give my dog chamomile, lemon balm, oat straw, passion flower, these kind of herbs. I personally don't like to take lavender. There's something about taking it for me. So I always stick with lemon balm, super easy to grow as well. It's from the mint family. These kind of herbs are going to be able to support your nervous system long term as well. It's one of the reasons that chamomile tea is so big. And it's not just because of its benefits, but because of this, it has such a strong smell. So I really believe that people who have chamomile tea a lot, just the smell of it will start to bring their nervous system back into that memory of, oh, we know what this is. This is a time to relax, for example. And it's one of the reasons, essential oils are so popular, and just the senses and the smells, for example, all of these type of things. Yeah. Let me think. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free. I know someone's put a... Yeah, and so the other massive thing in Ayurveda, Katie's probably gone through with you about your nervous system, is also what we'd call in modern medicine or science, circadian rhythms. And so one of the ways to look at the nervous system is that it is that overprotective person in our life that loves to remind ourselves of what has happened before. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's not always a good thing. But one of the ways to counteract that, and why routine and circadian rhythms is so important in Ayurveda and psychotherapy, is because we want to have that memory. And so one thing that will happen with Ayurveda when you really get into it, and I want you to be aware of, is that people will kind of emphasize things like have your biggest meal in the middle of the day, wake up in the sunrise, go to bed at this time, do this and this and this. And one thing that I personally saw when I took on everything with Ayurveda, I've worked with 3 different Ayurvedic centers, is that I would see a lot of people that root causes were different, perhaps trauma, perhaps stress, perhaps different diseases, perhaps hormones. And they would come into Ayurveda and they would get all of the stuff, and they would either feel incredibly overwhelmed and not do it, or they would do it so much that they'd become really harsh on themselves, ultimately adding more stress. And I know Katie's really good about this, about the practices that should be supportive of you, not add more stress. But just be aware of that, so there is beautiful practices in Ayurveda and the texts, and they do go into it really strongly about how we could kind of regulate and rhythm and routine our, what we would call now, so circadian rhythm. But if anything in your life, any practices new or old are causing more stress, when you're thinking about your nervous system, be honest with that. One example of this, and I've asked her often if I can use her as an example, is I had a client once who worked with 2 previous doctors who I'd worked with as well. So that's how she knew me. I was their apprentice, and she'd spent thousands and thousands of dollars on treatments and consults and herbs, and completely changed her life about the way that she functioned her life, when she went to bed, what she ate, when she ate, all of these type of things, all the practices, getting up early in the morning and doing everything. And she'd basically come to the first Ayurvedic doctor about sleep and about insomnia and about anxiety. And when all that didn't work, she went to the second person, and the same thing happened. She spent a lot of money. She took on a lot of these practices. Things started getting really bad. She started getting really bad. She couldn't sleep anymore. She became a lot more stressed. By the time she came to me, we kind of unpacked a lot of it. And it was this approach that Katie is good with as well, that there is quite a difference and there's quite a gap. It's one thing I'm really passionate about in the ways of, again, coming back to that more male hormonal body with number 1 and 2 stages of disease, as opposed to a woman's hormones, or someone who's gone through menopause or pregnancy, or is in stage 3, 4, 5, or 6 of disease. And when we come to the root cause of a lot of that, it's stress. It's always stress. It's guilt. It's trauma. It's learned experiences. It's conditioning as well. And so one example of this woman was when, by the time she came to me, I spoke to her about if you've ever gone to get a proper Ayurvedic consult, we don't just talk about, the body and the health. We talk about, their relationships, their work, how they're feeling, everything like that. And so I said to her, how's your family going? Because she had teenage boys and a husband, and a really great family, very supportive of her. And as soon as I said that, I could see her drop in her body. And she was kind of like, oh, I'm having a bit of problems. And I was like, oh, okay, what's going on? Thinking this might be the root cause. It had turned out that over the space of a year, she'd been working with these other Ayurvedic doctors. One of the things they had told her that she had to stop eating after 9 o'clock. She couldn't eat after 9 o'clock. That was the number 1 rule in Ayurveda for them. And she couldn't eat after 9 o'clock. She couldn't have a heavy meal after 9 o'clock, for example, all these type of things. So she was eating early, eating light at 6 o'clock, like we always do in Ayurveda, if you follow the guidelines a lot. The problem is that she had teenage boys. And so when they were coming home from school, they were often going to sports or hanging out with friends. And then they would come back together as a family around 7:30, 8 o'clock, even later, 8:30. And one of the things they would do is the boys would be hungry. They were teenage boys. So they would often have a big cook up quite late at night, 8:30. They were Italian descent. And that's when they would sit down and communicate and eat and have a talk. And, you know, often, or she would often talk to them while they were cooking and eating and all these type of things. And so she'd essentially taken that out to follow the Ayurvedic principles. And without looking at the root cause of her, when I went into the root causes, it didn't take long to kind of figure it out from an intuition point of view. One of her root causes of her anxiety and insomnia was that her teenage twin boys were talking about moving out. They were talking about finishing school. And so there was a lot of association with her of being a parent and what that meant when the boys didn't live with her and where was her purpose. And she had a lot of inquiring, questioning. She had a lot of fear about the world that they were going to go into and whether she had prepared them, and a lot of guilt as a mother, for example. So it was very mental, very emotional. And one of the root causes of that was her own childhood was unstable. So, she was really questioning and overthinking. And she'd taken essentially out one of the main points that she was relaxed and in a state of parasympathetic nervous system. And that was the nighttime eating with her kids and her family, because she wanted to follow the Ayurvedic guidelines. And so this is a really interesting point I like to talk about. Ayurveda is amazing, but please don't ever get rigid with it. When it comes to supporting your nervous system, you need to consistently ask yourself, what is causing more stress and what is supporting my stress? If something feels unaligned or it's causing you more stress, you let it go. If something feels like it would be helping your stress, pull it in. What I personally do, and I know that Katie always gives that intro to me, is like on piece of paper, I probably wouldn't look like I would be completely 100% Ayurvedic, because there's days that I don't do a practice in the morning, or there's days that I do sleep in, or there's days that I stay up late, or there's I'm very intuitive in my eating. So there's some days where it happened the other day actually, where I will be like, oh my God, all I want is a pizza, and I will get a pizza. You have to have these moments, because when we come down to the nervous system, it's still recognized in Ayurveda, but unfortunately not talked about when we look at the lifestyle practices of Ayurveda. As I said, there's two main points of Ayurveda: lifestyle and it as a medicine. When we look at the lifestyle practices, to become more rigid and more stressed and more pressure on ourselves is going to affect some of the root causes of the emotional and stress problems and hormonal problems along the way, not just with the nervous system, but with the stages of disease. And Katie's really good at doing that and being able to, adapt with 5 children, for example, but just be aware of that in yourself. If one of your root causes is something to do with trauma or a learned experience or emotional and mental health, you need to get the support to go into that and dive into that. But you also need to start with being nice to yourself. And sometimes that is letting yourself sleep, or letting yourself eat what you need to eat, or letting yourself have these practices. When you come to Ayurveda, if you find the things of Ayurveda quite overwhelming, really just strip them back and think this is about nourishing and preventing. So instead of saying I need to give myself an Abhyanga every day, see, I want to be able to let my skin enjoy oil and let my nervous system experience good touch that's soothing. Everything should be doing from a place of nourishment and supporting yourself, not because you have to. If you feel that you have that mentality, come in to see someone who's mentally, mental health trained, and because that could be a root cause of everything. And I used to be like that as well. So so once I could kind of get to the root causes of things that were happening mentally and emotionally and let that go, things in Ayurveda, you know, my circadian rhythm has never been better, to be honest, now in my life. But it's not from me pushing. It's from me going, oh, I'm ready for bed. And I don't even have my phone on me. It's on charger. And I just go to bed, and then I'll wake up naturally, and it will be like, oh, the sun's coming up. And it was times in my life where I was setting alarms or forcing myself to go to bed that wasn't happening. It's times now that I've focused on stress for the last 2 years, which have meant leaving a stressful relationship, having massive changes in my life, that now my circadian rhythm is naturally worked, because you've got to have that balance. And the difference was, instead of focusing on Ayurveda, I focused on the nervous system and use Ayurveda and yoga and herbs and diet and all the other things, other people, for example, as a support of your nervous system. And so if you can start to think like that, what is causing me more stress, what is causing me to be able to function better and support, then it's going to be able to put everything together and work a lot better as well. But yeah, just a really important fact, because I know a lot of the Ayurveda can become very overwhelming, and we can become very rigid with it as well. And you're essentially, again, coming into that idea of jumping into an ice bath. You know, it's kind of forcing yourself to do something that might not be in your natural state or what your body needs and is wanting as well. What else? Yeah, but in terms of the nervous system, one thing that also we're really seeing at the moment as therapists is the rise of mental health issues, the rise of nervous system dysregulation. As I said, COVID was a big part of that nobody's talking about. So it's important to talk about that. It's if you've got a really good relationship with a partner, or like me, with your family or some friends, just have a chat one day. Just sit down and be like, hey, let's have a chat. Like, how did you handle it? What did you like? What did you do? Like, what, you know what I mean? Just unpack it. It needs to sometimes be unpacked. As a counselor, I'm unpacking it still with clients because some happened and came up, you know what I mean? So things like that, because what your nervous system is doing at the moment is going, hey, is this going to happen again? And so anything like that in your life, that's why it's really important when anything does happen to you, whether it's a car accident, whether it's assault or abuse or a breakup or a loss, to validate it, to really, really validate it, because your nervous system goes into a protective measure. And so how you handle things and what happens afterwards, it will hold that memory and use it for or against you later. So it's really important when you're in something, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, external, or internal, to sit with it. This is yoga, this is asana, being uncomfortable in an uncomfortable seat, to be able to sit with it. And this is what the nervous system wants. It wants to be able to recognize how it can protect you later in life. So it may sound really corny, but even going back and going, hey, that was really good how I handled that, or that wasn't. This is why truth is also another limb of yoga, because having the emotional maturity to be able to say to yourself and someone else, hey, I was wrong in that situation, or I didn't handle that very well, or understand the truth of how you handled it, knowing from someone else. A really good example of this that I'm seeing a lot at the moment is, it happened to me when I got out of my last relationship, which ended up being really bad at the end, completely turning on me. And it was really messing with my head of how something that could happen for 10 years all of a sudden became what it came. And when I would talk to some people that had had similar experiences, namely partners had cheated on them or become abusive, or addicts, for example, a lot of the narrative was just, yeah, people, you can't trust people, you can't trust people, you can't trust people. And obviously, we learn that. When you look at kids, there's not this level of they can't trust You know what I mean? When you look at dogs, sometimes it's instincted because, you know, Rose wouldn't have been able to trust her former owners, but she trusts everybody now just from a couple of months. So we learn not to trust, and mainly we learn not to trust ourselves if something has happened. This is something the nervous system learns. And so when you start to come into that kind of experience, if you were opening up or being vulnerable with someone, it'll go two ways. It'll either be that you'll isolate, you'll stay away, you'll put boundaries up, you'll put walls up, for example, because you're protecting yourself, or you will throw yourself in with a whole lot of hopeless love and hope and probably get hurt again because you're not looking at it from an emotional perspective and mentally going, is this actually right? Or am I just rose coloring this? And both reactions happen. We're supposed to learn these lessons. This is what happens with people. But when we do isolate and protect ourselves, that's also the nervous system. And that's okay. And sometimes it's really needed after a time. You know, after I came out of my last relationship, I needed that isolation. I needed that protective skill to kind of figure out what had happened. But long term, it becomes a problem, and that becomes freeze response. It becomes fawn response. And so again, that's the nervous system trying to protect you. And this is why in yoga, you know, to keep ourselves open, in Ayurveda, to keep ourselves connected, one of the best ways I can talk about these practices of Ayurveda is to keep self-loving and romanticize, being able to massage yourself with oils, being able to make yourself a nice cup of chai, being able to make yourself food that you connect with, because you want to keep having that openness about love and about like the reminder that you can trust because you can trust yourself. So it kind of can come all at the same time, or it can kind of stem maybe very later in life. You'll experience something where you'll feel like people, you know, you can't trust, or people will have that story about you can't trust. But that is definitely a learned experience, and it's also a societal thing that we can kind of overprotective and underprotective as well. But that's just the nervous system working. And sometimes you almost have to kind of step out and laugh at it as well and be like, it's okay, it's okay. Like, you know, at the end of the day, in those kind of scenarios, the most important thing to remember is that you're still here. Every single thing you've ever been through, you've gotten through before. So even though if your reaction might not be one that you want or one that is serving you at the time, it's still something that is a memory of how you got through it before. And this is why so many people get stuck in flight and flight, is because they've had to be strong in their past at some point. And so when you come into flight and flight, what's also happening as well as you know, cortisol is adrenaline. There is a sense of adrenaline because we have to run away from danger. As you know, cave life, we have to fight things, we have to stand up for ourselves, we have to kind of get bigger. There's that, you know, those stories of mothers being able to move whole cars off their children. This is pure adrenaline, pure flight and flight. We have that ability in us. Some people can become addicted to it, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. They become addicted to the busyness. They become addicted to the rat race. They become addicted to high functioning, if that's how they see high functioning. It can be extremely hard and a very long process to teach yourself, if you've had that kind of conditioning or experience, that peacefulness and calmfulness and ease is actually the natural state. And that's what we also recognize in Ayurveda. And this is why it can bring up a lot of things. And I think one of the reasons that people are getting more anxiety and depression these days, not just because we're talking about it, is because we are starting to realize that we can relax, we can rest, we can say no, we can have boundaries, we can have benchmarks. And that feels unnatural because society in the world has kind of told us the opposite for the last, 90 years, I'd say. And so there's that conditioning as well. So just remember that sometimes thinking that you're in flight and fly is actually your nervous system trying to boot you up and say, hey, we need to move faster, we need to compete, we need to, you know, compare ourselves, we need to keep going. When in actual fact, you know, Ayurveda and yoga and all of these practices recognize this state. If you have a look at Tibetan and Chinese medicine, think about the monk, the Buddhist monk, you know, the one that practices it the most. Think about the state they're in. They are not high functioning because they are stressed and running around and the busiest person. They're not like that at all. You know, they walk slow, they move slow, they talk slow. And so when we come into that idea in nervous system, in Ayurveda and yoga and psychotherapy, you know, it's the conditioning in our minds that we have to be like that. And often unconsciously we're addicted to flight and flight because it's gotten us somewhere. It's become what's strong. If you've ever been told in your life you're so strong, there will also be an unconscious mentality that you have to being weak, because you think that being weak is the opposite of being strong. But it's not like that. Being vulnerable, being calm, being soft is the opposite of being strong. We only have to be strong when we have to be strong. It's not our natural state. Our natural state is just calm and peace and being able to go in and out when we need to, if danger arises, for example. So really be aware of that. Ayurveda is massive on awareness. As I was leading into one of the big causes of mental health rises in the last 10 years, it's very easy to see because since 10 years, it's been going like this. And if you look at what happened 10 years ago, Instagram happens, social media happens. So this awareness of information, of overload, is causing too much flutter in our minds, too much overwhelmment. It's causing us to compete. It's causing us to compare. It's causing us to come into those states that are natural. And we feel unnatural at the moment because this is an unnatural state. We're not supposed to have this bunch of information. We're not supposed to have this much awareness when it comes to what other people are doing and competing, for example. So, you know, if you're someone that's really having trouble regulating your nervous system or balancing out your elements and your doshas, for example, you know, have a look at that too. Have a look at what you think is your natural state and what is actually your natural state. And then remind yourself in Ayurveda, as always, our natural state is just to be, it's to calm, it's not to have to be busy. I don't know when it happened, but we started working around like busy was kind of like a thing to wear, you know, when people say, oh, how are you? Busy, 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 you know what I mean? Became a natural state. But yeah, I don't know if that all makes sense. How are we going for time? So any questions?
I don't have any questions, but more of a statement.
Mm.
I love what you said about yoga, because when I go to a yin yoga and
Yes.
yoga nidra class, and before it there's a vinyasa class, and they all come out and they're all sweaty, and I'm like, I think they're missing the point of what yoga is about, like, and and I think, am I missing what yoga is about? So just like
No.
happy with what you said.
What you're probably only thing you're missing is what people need in Western modern society, and what they have been told. I get it all the time is people come to yoga because they've been told to relax or they need to stretch. And you know, yoga is a philosophy, but the movement of the practice is for us to be able to come into stillness and discomfort. And so what's happened is that people have realized that they can do these practices, and then, as I said, they've become addicted to flight and flight. We've become addicted to this level of functioning that is abnormal. We're seeing a rise of diseases, we're seeing a rise of mental health, and people don't know how to process it. So what they think they need is to sweat and to move hard. There's also been a ridiculous amount of information in the health industry since, I'd say, the 1980s about high intensity sweating, running, low fat, high sugar, you know, all of these type of things that are actually ruining the hormones longer. One of the things that people still believe is to lose weight is they need to do more high intensity exercise and sweat. If you understand how we burn calories, it's not through sweat, it's not even through digestion, it's through breath. That's how we burn calories, which I find fascinating, because people are hyperventilating and holding their breaths doing these hot yoga classes and these running exercises and these high intensity. And it's like, if you were actually able to regulate your breath better, you'd be able to, you know, manage weight better if that was the problem that you were dealing with. But yeah, it's insane what yoga's become.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I used to teach at 5 different places. Now I teach at 1 because I couldn't. I feel like it's the expectation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that was happening was you would always go slower or teach, you know, something like a bridge pose with a block, and people would be up doing handstands and shoulder stands, and I'd be like, we haven't prepped for that. And I actually, you know, like one woman said to me, like, I don't need to prep to do a headstand, or I don't need to prep. And I said, yes, you do. Like, there's the asana is the sequences, but also anything that's causing more stress and everything. It's not about showing. I find it hilarious because one of the main foundations of yoga is to detach from your ego. And everybody has become about ego. And also the other thing that happens with yoga, and I get it a lot, and one of the reasons I don't like demonstrating too much is because I have been doing yoga for 30 years, but I am extremely hypermobile. So what my range of motion looks like on a platform teaching is, I would never want someone as a mental health professional to look at me and be like, oh, I can't do that, or I'm not as flexible as her. You're not as flexible as me because I now have arthritis, because I've become too flexible. Do you know what I mean? It's not a natural way. I always tell my students, the only thing that matters in yoga is your breath and your comfort. If that, I have students that come to class and maybe do 5 asanas, but just want to sit there for the experience and the breath, and you know what I mean? And yeah, it's sad what it's become. And I think I used to teach at a really big studio in Sydney where it was heated, and people would come in summer and do heated yoga, vinyasa, and want to really move quickly and breathe quickly. And I just used to think, like, they're gonna burn out. Like, you're gonna burn out. They're absolutely addicted to fight and flight. You know, and we say in Ayurveda, like attracts like, you know what I mean? So people that are, you know, doing these kind of practices, this is because this is what people are addicted to, that modern high frequency, high movement busyness. They're having trouble relaxing. And I mean, restorative yoga is not for everyone, definitely. You know, I couldn't do a restorative class, but I teach it. But I do it myself. Do you mean? So like, it's again that coming into the extreme of meditation, but no, it should be much slower. This is why, you know, Iyengar is starting to see a lift now in popularity, because it is a lot more with props and a lot more accessible. But yeah, it's sad what it's become. But there are a lot of teachers that are coming back to the roots of it. Yeah. Any other questions? I can't see for some reason. Okay. Yeah, and just a reminder too, like, you know, there are 600, I think there is. Yeah, 600 neurological diseases that are recognized in modern medicine that come from the nervous system. Ayurveda, I think it's about 450 they recognized. The newer ones are more environmental. So maybe things that weren't around back then. Ayurveda, the texts were written 6,000 years ago, but they recognized everything. This is one of the things that I loved about Ayurveda coming to it in stage 6 of disease, was that they had protocols for what I was diagnosed with, and the Western medicine didn't. And it was kind of like, what do you mean? They could tell me where it came from and why it came from and how to kind of fix it. And the treatments that I do in the clinic and that we learn, you know, we do things like Bastis and pulses and Shirodara. And if you've ever had Ayurvedic treatments, you know, you'll know there's a whole complexity of them, of how to do them. A lot of, you know, if you don't have access to Ayurvedic treatments, I always say, you know, find a good Chinese medicine practitioner. A lot of the practices cross over, are very similar: marma points, acupuncture points, Bastis, cupping, acupuncture, marmotherapy, you know, so there are practices that you can do, but they're very, yeah, they're all in terms of function. So things like Parkinson's, that's in Ayurvedic texts, MS, epilepsy is in there. I'm trying to think of them off my head now. Many, all of them, you know, in terms of anxiety, depression, bipolar, personality disorders, a lot of that's in there as well. We can kind of come into the neurological side of it as well. As I said, it is medicine, you know, so they really recognized the brain and the that Dhatu being so important and impactful in terms of our psychological, mental, emotional health and how it affects it. Chronic pain symptoms, autoimmunes with chronic pains, very much recognized as well. One of the things that happens with chronic pain in terms of your nervous system in Ayurveda and in modern medicine is basically that explanation I said. If you have a sore knee, your brain is going, where is it sore? So your brain is going, that's where the pain is, and it will focus on the pain. People who suffer from chronic pain, depending on what the root causes are, if it's neurological, what's basically happening is your brain is unable to figure out where the pain is, or if there's pain. So it will just send those flashing fairy lights to every part of your body. So that's what's happening. A lot of people, and unfortunately in the West, sometimes we dismiss people that have chronic pain. We say it's not a real illness, but it is a nervous system problem. It's a nervous system saying, I know I'm in pain, but I don't know where, so I'm just going to tell my whole body I'm in pain to protect it. And again, it's that overprotective kind of person trying to fix us, but not knowing how and kind of protect us. So when you do start to unpack that idea of root causes, if you feel like you do all these practices of yoga and Ayurveda or your own practices, a lot of the practices I do are more earth religion based, as Katie kind of touched on, very crossover with Ayurveda as well. So when you do all these practices, like I said, when I get chronic depression, if it shows up, all these practices I'm doing every day, and then something just feels off or feels heavy, or maybe when I teach a yoga class, I might be a bit more affected, or, you know, might think, oh, that was bad, or kind of I can hear myself starting to talk badly to myself. That's usually one big symptom. In yoga, we say, one of my favorite quotes, you can be your own best friend or your own worst enemy. So the minute that I can start feeling like I'm saying to myself, I should have done that, I should have done this, why did I do that? You know, starting to talk like an enemy, that's a sign for me. That's coming back to that first point of disease, because it's a mental health issue when we self-harm the way that we talk ourselves. It really is. It's so damaging. And if you can step out of that and go, hey, this is a symptom, something else is off. Maybe it's your digestion, maybe it's your sleep, maybe it's a bit of everything. Maybe it's your reaction. Maybe someone said something to you about your work, and normally you'd be like, okay, cool, but you can't let it go. Do you mean? Or maybe you and your partner had a little bit of a disagreement, and usually it just kind of resolves, but for some reason you can't, or everything that they do is annoying you, or everything your kid is doing is annoying you. This is usually a hormonal thing. But when we start ignoring all these little things and these little signs in ourselves, this is why Ayurveda, you know, these things are seen as symptoms and signs. It's our body's, our nervous system way of communicating with ourselves. What we do in modern world is take painkillers or, you know, take a bunch of caffeine or kind of get on with the day. And that's fine, and it's needed in very many times in many different ways. I'm definitely not anti-medication. But when we come to the progress of coming into these deeper stages of disease in Ayurveda, we can often trace back to, oh yeah, I've had a headache for many years, or I've had trouble with my digestion and sleep for many years, or I've been irritated for many years. Those symptoms are there, and we're able to kind of come back into them and prevent them. When you have certain practices in your life and they all of a sudden don't really work or support you, that's also a symptom. And it's something to kind of come back and go, where is my nervous system dysregulated? Why is this happening? And where, like, how can I kind of come into it? If you have no idea of why you can't come out of flight and flight, or you can't come out of freeze, there will be a reason. Absolutely take, like, I hope that it's comforting to know that there will be a reason. A lot of the times when we come into things like high anxiety, high stress, high depression, a lot of autoimmune diseases, a lot of physical illnesses that are coming up consistently, we can feel like we have no control, that the control is beyond us. And when we're at that stage, just think of it. We're probably at stage 3 or 4, and it's not about not having any control. It's just about recognizing what's got us there at the start and coming back even 1 or 2 steps. We always have control over our health. One really important message that was completely misconfused up until about 40 years ago was that the brain doesn't heal, that it doesn't renew, that it doesn't create new cells. And this was a huge breakthrough in neurology, because it taught us that it does, it absolutely does. Your brain can heal and it can learn new things. But most importantly, in that founding, when we looked at the brain, was that trauma doesn't mean that your brain is damaged. It doesn't mean that you're broken, which is a lot of people that actually we found the opposite. People that had been through things in their life where they had to come into flight and flight and really be affected by that, or they've had to go through a trauma or a learned experience or a form of abuse or an accident or a big illness in their life or a big loss in their life, or have something major, you know, externally happen, being in a war or a bushfire, all those kind of things. What we found now and learned is that that actually makes our brain more resilient. It makes our brain more capable, and makes our brain often in our personality more sensitive, more empathetic, more understanding. And this is such an important breakthrough with the nervous system, because if you remember, the nervous system is this protective thing in your life trying to protect you from what's happened before, and that's based off memory. So when we go through these traumatic events, or we go through these big life-changing events, it's very easy for us to think that we're broken, or we're damaged, or we're never going to be able to trust, or we're never going to be able to get over it, or we're going to be fearful or scared our whole life. Our nervous system will be to a point, but that's because it's protecting us, because it knows what could happen. But we've taught it something. So think about it in that way. All you need to do is start preventing and caring and nourishing and supporting yourself here, dealing with any root causes that come up or any more stages of disease. Because when something happens again, because it will, whether it's internal or external, your brain has a memory to go back to. And it's just understanding the difference between reaction and learnt. Do you mean? So when, say, for instance, your learnt experience, as I said, the example of growing up in an alcoholic family, you know, this might be, oh, I'm never going to be able to feel safe around alcohol, or I'm never going to be able to. You might be drawn to people who are also going through addictions or abuses and stuff like that as well. But you can get to a point where you can know yourself, nourish yourself, support yourself so much that when that comes up again, maybe you're in a situation where someone is drunk and someone is yelling, your body and your brain will be like, this has got nothing to do with me. I'm out of here, and just leave. You don't have to stay in those situations. You don't have to. You can just leave. You don't have to fight. You don't have to take it on. You don't have to process it. You don't even have to help them. You can get to the point where your brain is like, we did that before. Now we're going to do this. We're going to look after me. That's it. And that's how we grow in the brain. That's how the brain becomes emotionally mature. It's also how the nervous system learns which reaction is right. Maybe the reaction before was to fight. Maybe the reaction before was to take it on ourselves, especially if someone we loved had an addiction problem. Maybe the reaction ourselves was to overcare and protect them and become this, protector for them. When those didn't serve us before, we will know in that situation, if someone is dealing with an addiction and getting to the point where it's becoming stressful for us, the right nervous system reaction is to leave, protect yourself. That's it. That's all you have to do. Do you mean? It doesn't even matter if it's someone that you love, because they need to sober up and calm down, and then we can help them. But you know what I mean? It's so that's a really good example of how your nervous system may have been taught to fight or to run away or to avoid or to freeze or to shut down in those situations. But when you can come into this point of emotional security and maturity in your nervous system, your responses in your who you are, you can understand what the right reaction to do is. It's the same in yoga. One of the things I love about yoga is the idea of ahimsa. People think it's just kindness, but one of the teachings behind ahimsa is that it's also as important to speak up when there's an injustice. So the kind thing, not necessarily, for example, if someone is getting bullied in front of you, the kind thing is not to walk away. Just that doesn't make you kind because you didn't do the bullying. The kind thing is to step in or to get that person out of the situation or to reassure that person. You know what I mean? That's the kind thing to do. There is action that's also required in non-violence, in kindness, in non-harm. And when it comes to that, that's also really important when it comes to nervous system, because there are injustices in the world every single day. There's injustices that have happened to you in your life. And when we don't recognize that they can affect our nervous system, that's an injustice to yourself. So one thing I always talk about is we talk about depression, sadness, we talk about anxiety, worry. We don't talk about anger enough. And a lot of the root causes of nervous system dysregulation can be from an injustice in your life, and it can be from the anger of that. If we're talking about pitta, it can be pitta. A really good example of this physically that can show up is someone who is coming to a point of menopause, who's dealing with weight issues. They might come to an Ayurvedic practitioner because they've put on a lot of weight through menopause and they feel like it's a hormonal issue. There will be a hormonal imbalance, but maybe through the Ayurvedic world or their own research or own diagnosis, they've told themselves they have a kapha imbalance, because that makes sense, kapha, overweight. But quite often it's pitta. Quite often it's fire. There's anger. There's an injustice. There's something that they haven't resolved through their life, or they haven't dealt with, or there's an injustice that they're dealing with now, and they're burning out. And so their hormones are burning out and their body is going into a state of flight. And at that stage in their life, we hold food, we hold fat as a survival. One of the really interesting things about anthropology is that every single person who's alive today, our ancestors would have been some of the fattest people in their tribes, because at one stage in their life, they would have had to have gone through extremely cold temperatures to survive. They would have had to have had layers of fat. Now in Western society, we see fat as the enemy. We see obesity and like we say it's kapha and it's not. But we've also got to recognize as survival, our instinct is to hold certain amounts of muscle and fat in our body to survive. So sometimes when we're dealing with something like weight gain, it can be hormonal, but the hormonal issue is because we're in a state of flight and flight. So, I mean, that's another example of how happened to me. I used to be 30 kilos heavier than I was when I first came into Ayurveda. Everyone told me I had a calorie imbalance. And when I got to the root cause of it, it was definitely pitta and injustice and fire and flight stuck in that. So that's another thing. And I don't care. I don't preach about weight loss. I think it's terrible that we focus on that. I think it's more about focusing on your nervous system. But just as an example of that, same thing about people that are struggling to put weight on, and they're trying to focus on their body's natural stuck is flight and flight as well. You know, it all comes back to the nervous system, and it all comes back to their hormones. For them, when their hormones are high, their metabolism gets higher and they keep running. So again, it would be calming that down. Same thing, same treatment for both different scales if you were looking at something. And in modern medicine and wellness, it's completely taught the opposite. People who are underweight don't exercise, eat a lot. People that are overweight exercise a lot, don't eat anything. Both of them aren't serving your nervous system and the root causes. So things like that, that's why when you come into Ayurveda and the idea of balance, that's all that matters. Nothing about the weight, nothing about age, all that doesn't matter. It's about having the right emotional response on how to react and understanding yourself as well and what you need. And it's also, you know, just being kind to yourself. So if you know that things are triggering for you, you know, then don't put yourself in those situations. One of the most important things, I'm trying to remember what psychologist said it, but one of the most important things you can ever do for your health is know when to say no, you know, and not putting yourselves in situations that are going to stress it, or with people, letting things go, not pushing yourself to do something that isn't right. You know, that's also, if you're in that nervous system frame of having to push and being stuck in flight and flight, just stop. Like, absolutely just stop and see what happens then. But yeah. Any other questions? How we go for time? Oh, it's 12 o'clock. If you have any other questions or when you want to reach out as well, feel free to contact me. I can do online appointments as well if you want to dive more into the root causes, especially when it comes to trauma. It's something that I'm really passionate about, having been through a lot of childhood trauma and that myself, and coming out of that and having that had impacted my health, but also coming out of an abusive relationship and being able to kind of understand how that nervous system, really interesting. Like people often have the perception therapists wouldn't be in these kind of situations, for example, but when I started studying psychotherapy, I was a counselor before and an Ayurvedic practitioner. This is another example when we focus on all of these things about what we eat and what we do in our yoga and our Ayurveda and that, without looking at the root causes. And I was doing every single thing. My practice was to a T. But even as a counselor, I wasn't understanding the root cause. And for me, my root cause at the time, a few years ago, was my relationship. And I wasn't even looking at that. I wasn't even being honest about that. And that's when things started. When I started being honest about it and saying no, things shifted and changed a lot. And it became apparent that my nervous system and stress was from being in that relationship and holding myself into it. So I had to get really honest with that. And it was when I was studying psychotherapy, because as I said to you, start figuring out what sets your nervous system off. And I could teach and I could do this stuff and I could treat people and I could make herbs and I'd feel relaxed. But the minute that my partner wasn't relaxed, I would be in flight and flight because of what would happen when he wasn't relaxed. And I was recognizing in that constant state of being in that relationship, it was affecting my mental, physical, and emotional health. Through learning about nervous system, I was able to realize what my root cause was, and be honest about that. So when I do the psychotherapy and the counseling, I'm really passionate about helping people get to their root causes. Sometimes it is hormonal. Sometimes it just requires blood tests. If you feel like you've got a bit through past the prevention point in your health, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, First thing first, get a blood test, get full blood test. Often it's just a vitamin deficiency. Vitamin B12, huge, vitamin zinc, vitamin magnesiums, irons, things like that. If you find that you're deficient in something, reach out to a herbalist, myself, or a naturopath, you mean, to figure out how to absorb that properly. A lot of the supplements don't work or will cause more imbalances. Ayurvedic practitioners, for examples, to help you. But yeah, you know, sometimes the root cause is that. Sometimes the root cause is just a learned experience that you have to unlearn. So maybe your learned experience with that car accident is that cars aren't safe. Do you mean? And learning that it is safe. It's okay. You can be safe in that environment. Yeah, we just have to. And the biggest thing to unlearn today is that we don't need to be in this flight and flight. We don't need to be in this busyness. We don't need to be continually going. It's extremely hard, but extremely important. Perhaps the most important thing you can ever do for your health is learn to just be, learn to relax, learn to do nothing, not on the phone, not learning, not on a podcast, not listen, you know what I mean? If it's listening to music, I'm a big music person, then that's fine. But just giving yourself permission to not have to do something all the time. Just relax and rest, because that's what your nervous system is really craving. And the longer you don't feel comfortable in that state, the more your nervous system will remember it. So when you do relax, or you do say, I'm just going to sit down and watch this TV, your mind will be like, no, we don't do that. And it will make you feel guilty. And then you're going to have more root causes down the track. But yeah, so be kind to yourself and just kind of connect. There's a lot of ways, all these practices, find what works for you. Sometimes they really work, sometimes they don't. Some days I love nothing more than scraping my tongue, oil pulling, giving myself a dry brush. Some days I'm like, I'm not doing that today. So, you know what I mean? That's the beauty of Ayurveda. I see it as a tool belt. Get all the tools you can. And today it may be a spanner, tomorrow it may be a hammer, you know. This morning it was a hot shower. I needed hot and a hot cup of chai. That was what I needed. Yesterday, I did like a full thing, you know what I mean? But that's it. That's the beauty of Ayurveda. It doesn't have to be rigid. It just has to be the tools. And when you need them in your nervous system to remind yourself, pull out what happens for you. But yeah, stay with asana as how you want it to be as well. And your pranayama. The breath is more important than meditation. I will say that again and again and again, especially if you're stuck in fight and flight. Meditation is advanced practice. If you're talking about yoga, it's the advanced yoga, not handstands. So stay with breath, and yeah, reach out if you need. But thanks everybody.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
You're awesome.
Thank you very much. See you later. Okay.